All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Ben Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Cherie.
All right, so we're back in studio on this ridiculously rainy. Is that thunder? Oh my God! And now it's thundering. So we're in the studio on this ridiculously wet and rainy day. But this is Atlanta, so we all knew that good weather we had wasn't going to last but so much longer before it turned 20 and 30 degrees. And today was the day. But nevertheless, we still have great conversations. Had a good time in the studio. So Simone, what's on the rundown?
So before we get into talking about environmental justice and having hopefully a really enlightening conversation for a lot of people, we're going to cover a couple of topics, one in particular related to school shootings broadly and also sort of the events that led to the onset of this event in Tennessee that we're going to talk a little bit about. The vice president gave a very powerful and fiery speech about.
Who, Harris?
Yes, she did. Has commented on it. So we'll talk about that for folks who don't know what's going on there, and maybe just a quick update on the Trump indictment based on what you brought up, and then we can get into the meat of today.
All right, so before we jump in, I'm going to let our guest, and she's no stranger to the show. Again, once you've been here once, your family. So she's Blend family, so I'm going to let her introduce herself, and we're going to jump into these topics. Go ahead, Doc. Let everybody know who you are.
Thank you, Ricardo and Simone. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Dr. Latoria Whitehead. Is that tell me something else about myself?
Yes,
okay, who you are. Which...
Yes. Okay, sorry.
Public intellectual, etc.
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Dr. Latoria Whitehead, and I am a Spelman College adjunct professor. I'm a political scientist by training. I teach environmental politics and policy at Spelman College. I integrate environmental justice into that. I've been doing that for about 10 years. I also have a consultation firm, the LS Whitehead Group, and we assist community-based organizations. We assist individuals. We even create talking points for politicians when it comes to addressing environmental justice issues. And in my latest career was at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for 18 years as a senior advisor in that role, and with the Department of Health and Human Services as a senior advisor for environmental justice and health equity.
So that means she's important, people. That's what that awesome. She's very important, and we're very honored to have her in the studio on today.
Oh no, I'm humbled.
Very important. All right, so let's get into the first one. What are we talking about first?
Yes. So for folks who essentially were not aware, last week there was a deadly attack at a private Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee. The news has recently come out that this particular shooter had planned the attack for months. There had been journals found in the shooter's car. This was the March 27th attack that killed 6 people. And so since this has happened, there has been mass protests in the Tennessee state capitol. And essentially, to recap, 3 representatives in Tennessee, all Democrats, were accused of disorderly behavior and were accused of encouraging protesters in the House. So since then, these protesters have been expelled, essentially, which a lot of people were not familiar with this proceeding. It has made international news. There have been representatives from New Zealand, 8,000 miles away, commenting about their outrage that elected officials who have been, voted by the public as representatives have been basically fired. Usually this does not happen in American politics, with the exception of maybe extreme incidents of sexual assault allegations or some other really heinous crime. But essentially these are 3 Democrats, representatives who were standing with probably their voters and protesting gun violence as a result of the school shooting that happened, and were expelled by a vote of 72 to 25. And Vice President Harris has since also come out to talk about this.
Which I find amazing between her busy schedule of whatever it is she does. Because you said she was doing something that when we were on the air Thursday. You said she was going somewhere.
So she was coming here. To talk
about what?
So to
potholes?
talk about climate, I believe. To talk about climate and energy, solar energy.
Oh, I thought she was going to talk about the potholes or something.
Not about the potholes. No one's addressing potholes.
That's
going to be a problem.
I never know what Harris is up to these days. She just kind of pops up out of the ground sometimes.
Yeah, but these are young black representatives, right? And there was a deadly school shooting in Nashville. There was plenty of heated emotions and plenty of vitriol, like gun violence in particular. School gun violence has been an ongoing conversation. This is not the first protest as a result of gun violence or as a result of school shootings.
Well, the overarching issue is that, first of all, these were the 2 youngest black lawmakers. That's number one. It's Justin and Justin. So there were two, and they were with a white Caucasian female who did not get expelled. That's what became a hailstorm. It's like, so we suspended the two young black people, but we didn't suspend the white older Caucasian lady. That's what put this in a tailspin. I did not know that was even a thing until you brought it up Thursday. I was like, because when we were talking about schools and when you said expelled, I was like, oh, so they expelled some of the people from the school. And he was like, no, they actually expelled them from their lawmaking privileges. It's like, wait,
Right.
what? How does that even happen? So that's where the outrage is like, so you suspend the young black lawmakers, but not the older white Caucasian. And they were all doing the same thing in
Yeah.
the same space.
Right. And mind you, during the last legislative session, there was a Republican lawmaker who was accused of sexually assaulting a teenager. And as of this session, he was actually promoted to the chairman of the House Education Committee. So, and this was a student who he previously coached, supposedly, so allegedly. So again, like, there are plenty of scandals that follow plenty of politicians in many different offices. They do not normally result in this sort of action because
At all.
it's deemed that they're the people's representatives. And so it's the people's determination, if they don't like this person, to get them out of there.
So are they fired or are they just like expelled until there's a review or some crap like that?
So I don't know what the next step after this is. However, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some manner of legal action taken. Like, you can take these sorts of things to essentially the third chamber, the judicial chamber, and determine whether or not this is something that people should be allowed to do. But I think that this proceeding does exist, so I do think that there's precedent for it. It's happened before. It's just never necessarily happened over something like this. And under the banner of disorderly conduct, which, if you don't know, is a very, very broad term used for, I think, essentially any behavior that the right person is able to convince the right officer is disruptive, right? Parker Cannon, I believe it was, our own state representative, was accused of disorderly conduct during the 2020 to 2021 session in Georgia, when we saw her knocking on the governor's door.
Trying to do her job, which her job is to see
knocking on the governor's
when
door. So
policies are actually signed.
it's a broad description of activities.
Well, these are the kind of, and I said this on Thursday about the ruthlessness of Republicans and how they just kind of go for the jugular and don't really think about anything else because they know once they plant seeds, those seeds are going to set things in motion. This is very dangerous to me. So now we can up and suspend lawmakers, black lawmakers, like in a space. We can just do it. This is how stuff starts. And this makes me very concerned, the fact that they just kind of pull the parking brake while we're driving and just sent the car in a tailspin. And what can we really do? But I guess for me, that's what I'm worried about. So what can we do about this? Or is it just done? Because if it's just done and nobody can really do anything, what's to stop? Because, that's how they think. They start in one space and then it spreads to the other Republican-led states. And before you know it, now we're getting all black senators suspended or black law policymakers suspended. This is very dangerous to me. This makes me very nervous and it makes me very afraid because what's to stop any other state from doing it?
I mean, yeah, no, I hear you. Do you have any immediate thoughts about this?
I don't. I was actually listening to Simone this morning, MSNBC, a little bit of it. So I was still trying to wrap my head around, how that even happened.
Yeah.
And what are the next steps?
Right. I mean, I think what's interesting to me, is this has been a really, really awful year for the state of Tennessee, right? Because we saw this horrible, some of us technically saw this horrible video of Tyree Nichols being killed in police custody with 6 different officers in the city of Memphis. Then there was all of this news not even 2 weeks ago about Tennessee proposing a bill to bring back firing squads as a manner of executions, and jokes that were made from the well by a lawmaker who said, well, hanging would be cheaper, but I support this bill. These back-to-back incidents that happened within weeks, then this school shooting, and then now this. But I do think hopefully what it brings people's attention to is the fact that, like, a lot of these policies already exist. There's already something in statute that allowed for this to happen. But when there was more couth, it was never utilized, right? For the same reason that, like, the citizens arrest law
It brings us
had been
back
on the
to
books
that,
for forever, and
which
no
we
one
talk
ever-
about all the
Yeah.
time. It's like this stuff is on the books, but nobody thinks about it.
Well, but we've become so bold now that any possible loophole
They're going to take.
is going to be
They're going to take.
used. There are
And like I
people
said-
up at night late.
And literally like finding loopholes and going through pages and pages of documents trying to find their next move. And whether you love them or hate them, Republicans are so ruthless that you have to respect this. Like, I need the Democrats to stop sitting on the sidelines and playing in their hair. Like, they're not playing fair.
No.
They're pulling out every stop they can. And the fact that we can't seem to slow Trump down, even with him being indicted 34 times, he's raised more money now than he has before.
Yes.
Like, when you think about how this looks, the picture that's being painted, I don't like it. And it makes me very nervous. And if we're not careful, I know it sounds extreme, but if we're not careful, we could be sitting somewhere in a slavery pen if we're not careful with these kind of stunts being pulled. It makes me very nervous. Like, this whole expulsion, to do that, it's just like they just did it. And it's just like, now we're like sitting going, okay, so how does that happen? Like, what do we do next? Like, what can we do? I mean, the president says something about it, but does he have any power to actually intervene? Like, I'm inclined to believe he doesn't. So it's like, one state does it, and the next Republican legislature is like, oh, so it worked? Good.
Right,
we just want to make sure it can work.
there.
So now that we know it can work, now we can do it. Like, if a second state does this within the next 2 months, we have a problem. We have a very serious problem.
Agreed. Let's look up dual citizenship with Canada as soon as this show is over.
I tell you, I'm going to Germany. Tina Turner has
has
vouched for Germany. I'm going to Germany.
No, but seriously, this is I do believe this is serious, and I have always, I think, stood by the idea that people should exercise their ability to get rid of people that we don't want in office, right? Like, I do believe that is the proper course for things to take.
Like Marjorie,
like anyone, like a sheriff you don't like. I mean, a judge that you don't like. I mean, really anyone. I do believe it should be coming from the people. But the truth is also that, the legal system needs to play its role and move a lot quicker than it currently does, because these things take years and years and years and years to play out. And in the meantime, how much injustice happens? Like, how quickly would it be to undo any blue wave if you can just expel lawmakers for doing their jobs?
I'm telling you, the thought of it is, I can't.
The next
even.
election's not for over, in about a year and a half.
Well, I feel like they're testing boundaries. So it's like, let's see how far we can go, so that we can't. If this happens again, the whole voting thing, we don't get who we want, and let's see how far we can go. To clearly, we can't overturn it, but I'm sure there's other stuff we can do to kind of get our way. So I feel like they're testing boundaries. So what's next? If we can expel lawmakers, what are we going to try next? Like, this makes me very, very, very nervous, because this is an extreme, like, outright. We can do it, because we can do it, and we have the backing. We're going to do it. What's next?
I guess we'll have to see.
I don't like that either. I don't like that either. That we have to wait around to see what their strategists come up with next.
I mean, more people coming out in disgust would help, right? Because this did technically happen because it was a Republican-controlled General Assembly. So that vote was possible because there were enough Republicans who agreed to it. But yeah, I mean, the right to protest to me, this is a First Amendment issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's your right to protest.
I actually wish that
you're not stripped from that when you become an elected official.
It would have been interesting if today was Griggs' day. That I would have been curious to see what he had to say. What he had to say about that.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Okay. So, really quick update here. So, we know that this week there were 34 felony charges indicted to the former president, and there are also other ongoing criminal cases. So one of which in particular is right here in Georgia, in Fulton County in particular, DA Fani Willis. But her investigation does overlap a couple of other investigations. There's a broad inquiry into his conduct by the special counsel on the federal side. So the New York Times did put out some information today just about how messy this process is going to be over the next, year or so, because essentially there's the same small shared pool of witnesses, the same pieces of evidence that everybody has to get their hands on. And when you're, I guess, this big of a criminal, for lack of a better term, and there are so many different pending criminal investigations against you, it does get a little bit, it gets a little sticky, and it's also going to be incredibly expensive. So, interestingly enough, this person is actually in trouble for misusing campaign funds, while this person is actually raising quite a bit of campaign funds and mounting like increasingly high legal fees. And there were a lot of conversations happening, I think, 2 or 3 years ago about what this would mean if criminal charges were brought. And there was all this speculation about whether or not he would be able to get free legal counsel, find some Republican attorneys that is not going on. It is very expensive, and money is being spent. And so I know he can't touch that money, but I'm also kind of wondering who's checking the books as this is happening. Like, if all these legal proceedings are happening for a person who's in trouble for using campaign funds for legal proceedings, it's almost like, are we still creating? How do we know we're not still creating charges as he's being indicted for charges?
Trump is a plague, and he's like a cancer, and I didn't expect it to have to be surgically removed from the Republican Party. Like, he's literally not
surgically removed from Twitter.
And the extremists that are with him, it's just like, so y'all giving him more? The man has been indicted 34 times. Y'all giving him more money? This is really who we want in office. And like I said on Thursday, internationally, this concerns me. We've always made these little comments about dictators and all this stuff around the world. So now they're probably sitting back going, yeah, y'all been saying that for years. Now look at you guys. Y'all got a 34-time convicted felon still in the running for the highest office in your lands. Like,
and his numbers are going up as far as people favoring him.
Literally, like
today on CNN and MSNBC.
They believe he's being wrongfully persecuted. The election was
exactly
stolen.
Right.
There was a TikTok video of Blacks for Trump's back out. Like, I was like, are we seriously doing
Did that just come out?
Yes. Seriously just come out. White t-shirt. It was
what are they doing on the TikTok?
Just there was I guess a street reporter out asking like, what are y'all doing here? Like, what's going on here? And it was like, we're Black for Trump. Seriously. And it wasn't the like conservative sellouts that we say. It was like peanut them out there with like Blacks for Trump signs. So I was like, we really doing this. We're really, really doing this. But this is the weirdest thing. So questions have been raised about the impartiality of the judge overseeing this particular case because he gave $35 in political contribution to Democrats in 2020, including a $15 contribution to the campaign of Trump's opponent, President Biden. We're really doing this.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is what we're really doing.
It's the first time I heard that.
It literally, I think this came out like Friday or something. I cannot... So the judge is Juan Merchant, and they're saying that he may be biased and it may not lead to a fair trial. We're really doing this.
Does this have anything to do with Clarence Thomas? Do you think? I think it's very coincidental.
Well, it's like the opposite though, because now they're going to take Clarence Thomas is clearly Republican led, so they're going to do everything in their power to keep him there. But I guess removing her. So
so for people who don't know, so Justice Thomas did not report some very lavish gifts he received from some very wealthy Republican donors over the years.
And we're talking about going back like 20 years.
Yes,
So this is not like yesterday.
But it's also not $35. Mm-hmm. It was $19,000 plus worth of like gifts and free travel and perks, etc. And it was money that was not reported. And lawmakers have called for tighter ethics codes because of this. Apparently, there was a statement that he released saying that he'll now comply with the new guidelines and he'll disclose all gifts, and travel from now on, which just kind of feels like. Really?
I mean,
I won't do that anymore.
That's that Republican space. It's like slap me on the wrist. I'm good. Like let's just make it happen.
I just think it's funny that a judge supposedly gave $35 to Biden a while ago, like the same week that we're hearing about $19,000 worth of
But no, that's what Republicans do. If you ever notice it, they'll start a dumpster fire over here and then pacify the other stuff over
deflectors.
Here. They really are. Like they've started a dumpster fire.
Yeah,
so now the other little stuff goes away. Yeah. So now we're gonna call out the judge overseeing this for $30. But on the other side, Thomas is over here taking $19,000 worth of contributions over the last 20 years. Dumpster fire versus pacifying. They're very good at it. I need the Democrats to stop being so passive. I'm telling you, I'm very nervous what the end of this year is going to look. If they keep pulling these kinds of major stunts, I don't know what the next 6 months are going to look like. Y'all got to stop playing this reactive stuff. Y'all got to get proactive because the Republicans play the long game. They plant seeds. They water them seeds. And 10 years later, you see the fruits of it. You're like, well, when did this even start? It started back 10 years ago. Like, they think like that. I need the Democrats to stop being reactive and be proactive. Because I'm telling you, this picture is not shaping up to look well. I can't even sleep at night because Trump could be back in office in another year or two. I can't even sleep at night. Scary. And he's gonna be mad this time. So he's gonna want blood.
Get in our rearview mirrors.
Oh yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? It's
right.
Like I was so ready to like just treat this as a 4-year fever dream and just sort of
right.
You know,
it's over.
Maybe I don't even remember long enough to tell my grandkids about it.
Right.
He's like a roach.
Here we are.
Again,
Exactly like
34 charges later.
Exactly.
He's
Unbelievable.
still
Unbelievable.
like the highest office in the land. He
Unbelievable.
still can run
the
for it.
resolve of the base. That,
Yeah.
that this travesty is happening to this white multimillionaire. It's just the most grave act of injustice they've ever heard of in their lives. And it's just it kills me. It really truly kills me.
I don't know.
want to see cuffs. I want to see cuffs, and I want
Yeah,
to see
right.
time.
I
Listen.
think we
I don't
all do.
care if it's
Most of us do.
I don't care if it's club fed. I want to see time.
But I told you my other fear is like he'll be running the country from jail. They literally can't stop him. He'll be running the country from jail if he wins. Because even if he gets convicted, it still doesn't disqualify him from running for president, apparently. So he could be running the country from
what I
jail.
was replaying in my brain, unfortunately, was do you remember all the speculation about his health
Who, Biden?
during his
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh.
the doctor who came out with a report that said he was in like incredible or outstanding health
Mm-hmm.
after reportedly hearing that he eats Big Macs every day and watches at least 4 hours of television every
They
day.
mentioned McDonald's.
And I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm imagining an average 70-something-year-old man going to jail, and I'm thinking he probably is not going to last very long.
He's
but
not
wouldn't
going.
it be the case
They will put him in a
that
nice,
this one
cushy
could
space.
survive an
Right.
entire stint?
He's not going to
Probation.
jail.
I
Exactly.
don't
He's
see
not
it.
going to jail. Like
don't
he'll
see it.
go someplace cushy that sounds like jail. He's not going to jail. You know this and I know this.
I don't know this. I don't know this. I
Okay.
don't know
Well,
this.
you're more
I have
optimistic
faith.
than I am.
I have faith.
You're
I
more
have faith that
optimistic
he
than
will.
I am.
Let's move on to anything. Anything would be better than this. Anything would be better than this. Even the grave state of environmental justice or the environment in general would be better than this.
I'm trying to think, was there any good news that I could intercept before we even shift over? But I don't even think there's anything like good
Spring
news.
is here.
Is it really?
Spring is, I mean,
Is it really?
today is a, less than springy day, but spring is here, so we're springing forward.
Wait, did we do the whole groundhog thing yet? To see if he saw a
Over
shadow?
a month ago.
Oh, okay. I didn't know it's a big deal. I didn't hear anything. Wait, did he see a shadow?
The result was that the summer was going to come quicker. That was the
Okay,
result.
I don't know anything.
So whichever one means that winter's going to be short was the result.
Oh, you don't know the
I
groundhog
was
thing?
disappointed about that.
I don't do the groundhog thing.
You love the groundhog. Well, I think they actually named him. You know, they like to name stuff nowadays. So
February 2nd.
I don't even know.
Okay.
However, and we were also warned that it would be bad for the environment that winter was short because we had the hottest summer on record last year. And California had a drought that was so bad that they were walking around finding people and cutting off their water supplies because summer was so long. So I'm not looking forward to this, by the way. Just FYI.
What?
I long for winter all year long.
You're terrible.
living in
That's
Georgia.
because you have a
And
cold
the
heart.
summer is so hot.
That's what makes it
is
great.
Oppressive, the heat.
Oh my God, you're
There's
so
already
dramatic.
mosquitoes out.
I like the fall. The
Fall's
fall
great,
is
too.
not too
Fall's
cold,
good,
it's not
too.
too hot. I like fall.
I need
Pumpkin
summer.
spice.
I'm a flip flops
You're a
and
summer
shorts boy.
person.
I need flip flops.
I like
and
summer,
shorts.
but I don't love summer. Summer gets hot.
I love.
really
I don't like
hot.
being cold, so I like
Hornets.
being hot. I don't like being cold.
But what
So-
about cool? Like you don't like being cool in the fall, like a little cool August.
Yeah, but in
September.
Atlanta, it's always extreme. So there's no middle ground.
There
It's
really
either going to be
isn't.
cold or hot. And if
Right.
I have to choose, I want hot. I don't want cold.
Yeah.
Because cold could give us snowgeddon again. I'm not willing to live through
Oh, the
that.
2 inches of snow? That was
No,
so awful.
the terrible one that had the kids trapped on buses and we couldn't get out of
They
our
were
home.
trapped on buses that were on 2 inches of snow.
Whatever. The roads were frozen. It was terrible. And the city was not prepared for it. I don't want to relive Snowgeddon. I'm good. So no, I don't even want to take a chance on cold because Atlanta don't know. It only understands extremes. I'm good. I will take heat. But I digress.
Well, yes.
So we're going to go ahead and shift it on over to environmental justice. So we're going to start with what is environmental justice? Doc, take it away.
So environmental justice, I would describe it as it's an approach, right? And so when you achieve what one calls justice, you're actually getting something good, as most of us would think. Justice is something good. So environmental justice is an approach to injustice, and we basically believe in this movement that was created in, most of us say 1982. Some of us go back to the 60s with Dr. Martin Luther King. It's an approach to injustice where you have more populations that are specific populations that are bearing more than their share of what we call environmental burdens, environmental hazards. Most of these populations are people of color, low-income populations, BIPOC populations, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so environmental justice is an approach that says no matter what your race, ethnicity is, no matter what your income is, no matter no matter where you live, we should all be living in a healthy state of the environment. I would also describe environmental justice as freedom, as democracy, right? Being inclusive in the democratic decision-making process. It is connected to food security. It's connected to housing. It's connected to transportation. It's connected to voting. It's connected to various social justice movements that we have been through in our years of time, that generations before us have been through in our years of time. Environmental justice is all of this. So environmental justice is social justice, it's economic justice, it's the environment in its entirety. So you are approaching these issues holistically to try to bring justice where injustice exists for vulnerable, marginalized, disenfranchised populations. So it's an approach to address these issues, to address hazards and pollution and bad air and bad water, where because I am racially segregated in a specific neighborhood, I am bearing more than my share of that because I'm in this specific neighborhood, because I'm poor, or maybe just because I'm a person of color. Even if I'm middle income, my neighborhood still looks different from yours. So that is what we call an injustice, and environmental justice is an approach to bring equality to these issues.
Would an example be, so like, let's say there's a city or metro area where there's a lot of heavy industry or factories that all are always being built in like one part of town, where you can see that there's a demographic difference between other parts of town that aren't subject to like the heavy factories and all the pollution and stuff that gets created from there, like the concentration of what we know is going to cause environmental harm.
Right.
But it's really heavily concentrated in certain areas.
Right. And mostly, Simone, those are in those racially, we call them racial residential segregated, racial residential segregation, I'm sorry, in those segregated areas where that connects to noise, which is connected to mental health. That connects to air pollution, which is connected to asthma, of course. It connects to even obesity when you have certain neighborhoods that, what do you look at when you go outside of your neighborhood? Do you have sidewalks? Can you run? Can you walk? Can you get your exercise? If I don't have money to get a gym membership, can I do all of those things around my neighborhood? Is it safe? So that, yes, that is connected to an injustice, because when those industries plant themselves in those specific communities, they're directly connected to health inequities, health disparities. And we know that more people of color suffer from health disparities for various reasons, but all of these are what we call social determinants of health. Education, race, ethnicity, poverty, your neighborhood, all these different things, all those pieces, those variables, those quality of life issues, those are what we call social determinants of health in the public health world, but in layman terms, just quality of life issues. So they're all connected to what we call environmental justice issues.
So is there like a report card type thing that they go by that says, because I remember last time you said that there can't be like a dumping site within a certain radius of a community. Like, is there some kind of measuring stick that we go by to say this, to definitively say, okay, you guys, this isn't right for you guys? Is there some kind of measuring stick that we go by, or
well,
just what it looks like?
There's policy, then there's ethics too, right? So, when you have industries that plant themselves in specific communities, or you have industries that set up, they're getting their permits from the state, right? And so if they're getting their permits from the state to set up, and they've done technically everything they're supposed to do, they're going to plant themselves in very specific neighborhoods that one may call, politically powerless neighborhoods, right? Yeah, you got your permit from the state, but why are you in our specific neighborhood again and again and again? Because it's a black neighborhood, because it's a poor neighborhood, because it's a Latino neighborhood, because it's a, community with people of color. So technically, they may be able to plant themselves, in that industry, and there is no regard or no, you can't do this, for lack of a better term, Ricardo, describing what you were just saying. and you can't do it in this neighborhood. But technically, you kind of can if you have the permits and you've done everything you do. But ethically, they're planting themselves in the same neighborhoods because they feel like these people are politically powerless, and this is what we can do. The other piece of that is, hey, this is a poor neighborhood. Maybe we'll offer them some jobs. That's happened a lot historically. They need jobs, so hey, this is a good thing, for this neighborhood. So it's usually a lose-lose, it can be a lose-lose, situation.
Yeah, they make the economic argument, but then you have to think about, like, when those factories come, how likely is it that, like, a Starbucks will be built there, for example, or like a mall?
Exactly.
There's other
or Whole
businesses,
Foods,
yeah, that
Publix,
do not want to be there.
Right, exactly. And so that happens and has happened historically. Environmental justice, the movement has definitely, I'd say we progressed, but there's still a long way, to me, in my opinion, to go. But that's because we have systemic racism. We have institutional racism.
I was going to say, is there a difference between environmental justice and environmental racism?
Well, environmental justice is getting what we need to get to really mitigate environmental racism.
Okay.
It's getting you equity. It's getting you justice against environmental racism. So you've decided to be here because of the color of my skin, because of race, ethnicity, because you don't think that I can fight back, because you think that I'm politically powerless, and there's a dehumanization in that as well. And that connects to other social justice movements.
Okay, so now y'all to introduce this new theory. What is environmental racism? What is that?
So environmental racism is really the opposite of environmental justice. It says that, you have, this is a term that was created by Dr. Benjamin Chavis, and this is when the environmental justice movement came out in 1982. 1982, Warren County, North Carolina, where you have a poor income black neighborhood. They're marching against these environmental hazards, these industries, landfills being placed in their neighborhood. And so this really put a spotlight on, like, it was on the news. 500 people got arrested. They were laying in the streets. Police were, arresting them, saying, hey, you can't lay down in the street. You're going to be arrested. And it kind of sparked the attention of the entire world. And so people said, well, what's going on? Why are these people laying in the street? Why are these people, getting arrested? And they started marching. And so you have the creation of this movement. So the environmental justice term itself, it was created by the community. The Environmental Protection Agency did create an Office of Environmental Justice some years later during the Clinton administration in the early 90s, right? And of course, you have executive orders that came out during that time too, that directed federal agencies to address what we call environmental justice for minority populations and low-income populations. But this term was not created by federal government. It was created by these communities, and then they came together in the early 90s. And in D.C., and basically said, okay, and these are community leaders. They came together in D.C. and said, you know what is environmental justice? And they created these principles that we call principles of EJ. And when they created these principles of EJ, environmental justice, it is economic justice. It is safe housing and food and what we now call the built environment. But these things were created by the community in the early 90s. During that same time, when they were marching in 1982 and the early 80s for environmental justice, civil rights leader Dr. Benjamin Chavis created the term environmental racism. So if you have policies and regulation, and you have what we call a democracy or democratic decision-making process, and you are excluding people of color, if you are not abiding by these environmental policies and regulations, if you are polluting these populations, you are creating what we call environmental racism. That was a term created by Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And so, of course, we still utilize that term today. So environmental justice is an approach to alleviate what we call environmental racism.
Can you speak broadly to, like, who's the most impacted by environmental injustice? Like, which groups, which parts of the country or the world? Like, are there certain areas where there are much more severe problems for certain peoples, like different tribes or different ethnicities? Or
well, in general, it's a great question, Simone. Nationwide, more people of color, black populations, are impacted by environmental injustices. You have poor populations, white as well, that are impacted by environmental injustices. But when it comes to the black population, even middle income black people are impacted more by environmental injustice than white poor people, because it is systemic racism. It is environmental racism. It's another part of racism. And we know that racism is very thick. We know that it's very powerful. We know that it's very strong. And so this is another part of racism. You have, tribal communities. You have, Native Americans that are also impacted by environmental racism. But nationwide, you're looking at more people of color, specifically in the black population, that are impacted more by environmental injustices. And that goes back to it really goes back to institutional racism and the connection to different policies, the connection to housing, the connection to how we got here, the connection to the black population and the things that we undergo every day. It's just another piece of that. And even looking at other movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement, Civil Rights movement, it's all connected to those things.
And then maybe you can ask the opposite question. I don't want to jump over any questions you have, but is there a community or area where things seem to be better? And if that's the case, do you know why? Is there a state or, maybe a state or a metro area where you don't see as much injustice for some reason? I wouldn't
say not see as much injustice, but I would say California is very forward thinking in these pieces, is what I'll say.
Gotcha.
California is very I think that really for me, California is very forward in most of our issues, right? Quality of life issues. But California has been very forward thinking, in their environmental policies, in their, environmental laws, also in the fight for environmental justice. Now, in the South, environmental justice movement started in the South. And so this movement, we've been, fighting in this movement for a really long time. But I would say when you are looking at, progress and really being savvy and creative, I think California is one of those states that have been really good in that sphere.
Okay, so when we have the conversation about gentrification, and in my head, environmental justice, so gentrification is the notion that people kind of get put out and after they leave, the community gets a facelift.
Right.
Versus environmental justice say, no, you don't get to put folks out. You need to up their quality of life.
Right.
Is that a thing? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. Because what happens here is with gentrification a lot of times, and the reason why, Ricardo, it is connected to environmental justice is exactly what you said. You come to a neighborhood, you fix it up, you get a facelift, it's great. People who were there prior who could afford it can't afford it anymore, and a lot of those people become displaced, right? Some of those people become homeless. And how that connects to environmental justice is because now I can't afford to be where I was at. This is connected to housing and economic issues too, right? I can't afford to be where I was at, so now I'm displaced. I may end up homeless. Now I am connected to other environmental conditions that may be detrimental to my health because of my displacement, because I might end up homeless. So yes, it's directly connected to gentrification because you don't know what happens to those populations after they are, out of those neighborhoods. And why not gentrify the neighborhood? Well, fix up the neighborhood where those same populations could live and stay in those healthy neighborhoods. So you're fixing it up to put new people in it, which is a form of environmental injustice as well.
So when we look at, so I guess my question is, what funds this facelift from gentrification? Is it private money, or is it untapped resource that they didn't want to tap into while those particular people lived in that community? I guess that's in the back of my head.
That could be from the city. Mm-hmm. When the city wants to, place anything new in certain neighborhoods, even if you're looking at transportation. You want to get another, whatever MARTA. Some people don't want the MARTA. Hey, I don't want the MARTA in my neighborhood because I don't want those people in my neighborhood, right?
The famous term, those people.
Right. So people looking at those people. I don't want those people in my neighborhood, so I'm going to vote against it. I don't want to have that, that public realm of transportation here, but then you have things in the city that are funded by the city, that are funded by the state, and we're going to fix this up, and they have the funding to do that because that's what they basically choose to do. But a lot of times these things are done, and we're not looking at the people that are in those neighborhoods, and we're not looking at the people, well, actually what would happen to the people in those neighborhoods. And the connection to what one may call as well as black ecology, right? Where you're looking at the relationship between the black population and the environment, the natural environment, and also how it has an impact on ourselves and our health.
So what does legislation look like for environmental justice? Like what's included? Because when you were here last time, the bill was on the table, which apparently didn't make it, but the bill was on the table.
Yeah.
What was some of the wording in it? I'm just curious. Like, was there a rubric they wanted to go by? Like, what was some of the wording in it?
Well, the potential, I don't recall the exact wording, but the potential legislation bill that the late Congressman John Lewis was trying to put forward was around environmental justice, looking at this piece as a kind of a national policy. And I see it, Ricardo, as these things that we're talking about today, addressing these issues in a very national way, right? So we have policies that are very specific to the environment, right? Very specific policies where it is the job of the Environmental Protection Agency to make sure that those policies are in regulation. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, National Environmental Policy Act, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these various policies. And sometimes these policies can be utilized to approach what we call environmental justice, but then you still have these different pieces that are happening today, right? The things that we're talking about, gentrification and that connection to environmental justice. You have a executive order that was put into place in the 90s from Bill Clinton, not the late President Bill Clinton, I'm sorry.
I'm going to say, what you know that I don't know?
Past President Bill Clinton, Executive Order 12898, that was put into place at the same time when the Environmental Justice Office was created by the EPA, where he says, okay, federal agencies, you need to approach and do these specific things in the terms of your agency, in the context of your agency when it comes to environmental justice. CDC, Department of Health and Human Services, you should be doing this. Department of Transportation, you should be doing this. FDA, et cetera, et cetera. An executive order, we know, is a directive from the president, right? It's not a regulation. And when the next president comes,
he can overturn it or let it. Yep.
Right. So that was put into place. Bush came in. Not a big fan of EJ. Then you had President Obama come in and say, okay, let's get back to executive order. Let's go ahead and reinvigorate this piece. So with that, you have the environmental policy pieces, and then you have, various executive orders that can help environmental justice. But with Congressman John Lewis, the late Congressman John Lewis, I saw that after interviewing him as well, I saw that piece as a national environmental justice policy. I'll say a national policy to approach these issues in a very national fashion, where it's not, some states are doing this, some states are doing that, which would be amazing if we could ever get to that point, because it is not only symbolic of environmental justice, but it's a policy where we're all approaching and trying to get to what we call environmental justice. So to go back to your question, I don't remember the exact pieces in there, but I saw it as a very national holistic policy, which does not exist right now. So what we do as advocates, as scholars, we try to utilize, some of these pieces to approach what we call environmental justice. And then you have states like California that are very forward thinking in their policies, where they can be more stringent than the national government, right? Because a state can be more stringent than the national government when it comes to a policy. You can't be less stringent when it comes to a federal regulation, but you can be more stringent. You can be more strict I'll say, when it comes to that. So you have those states that are doing some of those things, and the top of my head is just, California, and that helps. But if we had a national policy, I think, specifically for EJ, it really grabs the attention of the entire world of what's happening and how this is a social justice issue, because EJ is social justice. It's economic. It's all of those things, and that's why we connect it to other pieces of quality of life issues.
So I guess in my head, I'm trying to reconcile how we give this teeth to directly go to war with like gentrification. I guess that's the piece that I'm trying to grasp. It's like, it's not a theory, but it's you see what I'm trying.
Well,
It's not
I
like
think so, but and I think to get to that too, I'm also wondering, does teeth mean money? Because there's the idea of investing in. I always hear conversation about investing in better ideas or better ways of doing it. But is it more about pulling back? Is it a combination of both? Do we need to tear down?
When you say
industries?
Pulling back,
yeah, do we need to tear down industries and projects? Do we need to stop certain things from, or is it just about investing in more?
Right.
Hearing about investing in more types of clean ways of doing all kinds of. So what does teeth mean? Does it mean
I think that's a great question from both of you all. It's a layered question. It's all of the above, right? So when we go back, when we look at environmental issues, when we look at disparities, and we started off talking, I think, a little bit about health disparities and what that looks like, where you have more neighborhoods, more people that are people of color, that the asthma rates for more people of color are higher. Elevated blood lead levels for Black children are higher than Latino children, than white children, Asian children, Native American children. When you look at diabetes, when you look at obesity, connecting these pieces to the environment connects quality of life. So going back to the teeth of this, it takes many things. It takes investment in specific neighborhoods, people of color neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods that are bearing more than their share of environmental burdens. It takes more conversation with industry to look at where they are planting themselves out at. And then if they decide that they need to plant themselves somewhere else, what are they getting out of it? This is very political too, right? Mm-hmm. So poli-sci 101, who gets what, why, and how much do we get? Why should we do it? Should we have this ethical thing where, we just love the world? Okay, that's not the reality. So it's political in who gets what, why, and how much, and how do we turn that conversation around with industry, and I'm not going to say to make them understand, because they understand. They understand, but to have the conversation where they are putting themselves in a place where it's not detrimental to the Black population, to people of color, to low-income population. It also takes investment in very specific neighborhoods. Well, why should we invest in this very specific neighborhood? Put more money into this neighborhood. Put a Whole Foods in this neighborhood. Put a Publix in this neighborhood. So then now you're looking at zoning policies and what's going in your neighborhood. What do you see when you walk out of your neighborhood? You see more check cashing stores, McDonald's, et cetera, et cetera. So now you're looking at that type of policy and being able to, as Simone stated, really invest in those neighborhoods. So this is so holistic in its nature.
Yeah.
This is this. It's EJ is an umbrella.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you all brought that up, because I want to make the point that it takes all of those very specific things. It takes looking at zoning policies and what's going on and putting in those neighborhoods, investment in those neighborhoods, conversations, with industries, conversations with, universities, and educating these specific neighborhoods too, and understanding how this impacts their health as well. So it is investment, it is policy, it's all of those things, because the environment is not like this little thing that's over here. And see, that's how a lot of people connect the environment like that. They think, oh, it's that little thing over there. It's not impacting me, but it is, because it's your quality of life. That's what the environment is. So this movement has definitely progressed. However, there's still a a lot more work to do. When we look at other social justice movements, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, such as the Civil Rights movement as well, those movements, BLM, you are fighting against, I'll say, police brutality, among other things, right? And in the Civil Rights movement, you are fighting for quality of life in its entirety, the democratic decision-making process, being a part of, various fair policies that impact my quality of life. The environmental justice movement is connected to both of those things. Black Lives Matter movement, on the surface, people may say, well, what does BLM have to do with environmental justice? Where you're looking at the dehumanization of my life. You're dehumanizing Black bodies. Environmental injustice, when you are polluting my neighborhood, when I'm drinking bad water, when I'm breathing bad air, you're saying that I am not worth good health. That is a dehumanization of my body, right? Mm-hmm. So it is very much connected. When you have police brutality and you have the various an increase of arrests for the Black population, you have to look at the environmental conditions that they undergo when they are in prison, right? And so in my class at Spelman College, we looked at some case studies, very specific case studies of very specific prisons where there was a majority of Black populations in those prisons. In those specific prisons, they were experiencing days without running water, toilet overflow, raw sewage, just very detrimental environmental conditions. Now, one may say, well, who cares? They're in the prison system.
Which is the argument.
Who cares? That's the argument. That's the argument, right? But you're still looking at human life. That's an environmental justice issue. Even in the prison system, that's an environmental justice issue. So when you connect the prison system, the environmental conditions that some prisoners experience, you connect that also to Black Lives Matter movement and the dehumanization of Black bodies. You look at the other social justice movements such as the Civil Rights movement as well, quality of life issues. When we go back to the Black Panther Party, a lot of people don't know that when Black Panther Party during the 70s, they were bringing children out to be tested for lead. They had a nurse and they were testing those children for elevated blood lead levels. They were giving them food for their nutrition program, because they had a nutrition program, but they were also testing them for lead. That's a environmental justice issue.
Yeah.
So when you look at EJ, you can connect it to the commonality between Black Lives Matter movement, Civil Rights movement, the prison system, even the things that the Black Panther Party were doing. These are dehumanization issues that we're standing for. So EJ is a part of all of that.
So that's the correlation that I wanted to ask you about too today, was how the prison movement or the anti-prison movement, the abolition movement connects to environmental justice, because there are states that I work in my role as an organizing director in California in particular, where a lot of people who are working against either the construction of new prisons or quality of life in prisons are working with a lot of environmental groups that normally are only known for doing environmental work. And I think a lot of what I've heard in those conversations and some of the bills that they've tried to pass usually involve like requiring environmental impact statements when there's going to be new construction, because usually the areas that prisons are built are areas where, for all the different reasons that you mentioned, get very significantly impacted by just all of the construction that happens when you build something like a prison.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about the people who will be incarcerated, but it's also about like all the prison-related pollution that happens in those areas that are probably already kind of like neglected areas, and where people who do live there probably already lack certain access, or it's common dumping grounds, things like that. So like, can you illustrate any more like kind of the harm, or like at least the correlation between the two?
The National Environmental Policy Act requires, if you are receiving federal funding, you have to put forward an environmental impact statement, basically saying that there is no harm with this. I'm getting federal funding, and there's no harm with where we are, what we are doing in this activity, in this initiative, right? And so that correlation to the National Environmental Policy Act, that correlation is directly connected to environmental justice, where you're looking at the human health and where the environment may have an impact on human health. That is the connection, to that piece. When you look at in different prison systems, as I, spoke about just a second ago, those environmental conditions that they are experiencing is another, of course, connection and example of environmental injustice. And when you look at those environmental conditions, when you look at why are they experiencing, let's go back to those basic quality of life issues we talked about earlier, race, ethnicity, income, et cetera, et cetera. But why are they experiencing those very specific environmental conditions? Because it is inhumane, because they are being dehumanized. And so that still goes back to Black Lives Matter movement, dehumanization, other environmental injustice issues, when you look at air pollution, asthma, et cetera, and how that has a connection to my human health. So the correlation and the connection is all dehumanization as how I see these things. This is my perspective, of course, of how I see these pieces. And the prison system, it all connects in how these agencies, how different pieces are set up, connecting to the National Environmental Policy Act, basically going back to that federal piece of, being able to say, okay, how is this environmental impact statement, how is this going to impact the population, having to be able to put that out there. If you can provide a statement that it isn't going to impact the population, well, that's what happens. You provided your statement, and it's
they
there.
give you a permit.
It's there.
Yeah. I mean, one example, if people aren't aware, this is in the state of California. In 2000, Folsom State Prison, very notorious, known prison, was accused of polluting the American River. There was 700,000 gallons of raw sewage found between 2008 and 2015. The Monroe Correctional Complex, which is actually in the state of Washington, dumped.
And where was the first one at, Simone?
This was in California.
California, okay.
Had dumped 500,000 gallons of contaminated water in nearby waterways. And according to the Black Warrior Riverkeeper, which is a nonprofit advocate in Alabama's Black Warrior River, the Donaldson Correctional Facility also illegally dumped untreated sewage into a tributary of the river for more than a decade, violating the Clean Water Act. So these are the sorts of, I think, environment related to prisons, and certainly the construction of new prisons that folks are talking about. Can you help people understand, and me, like who the actors are behind? So that are usually associated with environmental justice. So is it always federal agencies? And if so, like, is it the EPA? Is it states? I know there's lots of different actors, but like, can you help people understand who normally is either responsible for or
participating in their roles?
Yeah.
That's another great question. So in my class, we have a debate at the very end of the semester, right? And so everyone plays a role. They're group debates. So we have the federal government, they're representing the Environmental Protection Agency. We have the state government, they happen to be representing the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. They're the state, though, because I'm looking at a historic EJ case. We have the community, and then we have the industry, right? So I give them this historical environmental justice case that goes all the way back to the Clinton administration, right before Executive Order 12898 came out, right, about federal agencies approaching EJ for minority and poor populations. And the reason why I give them that case and they debate each other and they take on this role is because they're advocating for themselves. Even if they don't believe in the case or not, they're playing a role, right? But I do it because I want them to understand that everybody has a role in this thing we call environmental justice. So when you say who are the players, we're actually all players in this thing called EJ. So the federal government, who is the national government, right? We know that they are creating legislations and policies. Specifically, we'll look at the Environmental Protection Agency, where they are assuring that they're creating regulations meaning that the state, which plays another role, you are responsible for the Clean Air Act, for the Clean Water Act, for the Safe Drinking Water Act, right? For Resource Conservation Recovery Act. These various policies, and you are reporting this data to the national government, to the federal government, to the Environmental Protection Agency, because I, as the federal government, have put in a legislation that says states, you must do this to keep the environment clean, to keep people healthy. The states can also create, as we said earlier, more stringent policies that are more strict, which is great, than the federal government. They just can't be less strict. Now, with the federal government creating this these national policies and the states reporting to them, it's the state's responsibility to make sure that these policies, they abide by these policies, in this legislation. It is also, to me, it's their responsibility for good health for the population and the state government too. In the federal government too. How can we make more stringent national policies? How can we make sure that the states are abiding, by these policies and regulations that are more stringent? And then you have the industry role where they are, they have a very specific goal in mind in the context of who they are, in the context, of their company, right? They are getting the permits that they need to get to plant themselves in specific neighborhoods. That's what they do. And so having these conversations, with them, more conversations, it's just, I don't know, it's just so aggravating.
Sure, I can't.
As I talk about it.
Yeah.
But they have
role, like
they have a role too. And then you have the community. That's the most important role, because the community, they are waking up in their neighborhood. They're going to sleep in their neighborhood. They are in their neighborhood 24 hours. So you don't know how a person feels until you are living in their community. You just don't know. And so they have the role where they are being impacted. They are being affected by all of these different pieces. And they also have a role where they can navigate and learn and be educated on how these issues come together, connecting themselves to community-based organizations, environmental justice organizations as well, calling politicians, this is what's going on in my neighborhood, so they have a role as well. Universities have a role, if they want to have a role, to educate communities, on these pieces, to bring some light to these issues on what's happening in specific neighborhoods. And so, there's a role with the feds, the state government period, local government. There's a role with, with industries. There's a role with politicians and what's going on in their cities. There's a role with politicians and what's going on in the state. We all have a role. We have a role, and I feel like, I have a role. And part of the reason why I teach, at Spelman, is so I can continue to educate students on what's happening. And when you get out of here, you may want to be a part of that, as an urban planner, as an MD, as a PhD, as a host, as a radio host, to bring these issues to, we all can play a role in this piece, And that was part of the reason why I created the LS Whitehead Group. So I can come out of that box of the federal government where there are some lot of limitations and restrictions in that, and where I can help community-based organizations face-to-face, one-on-one, and educating them in what's happening.
Can I also ask, too, since you mentioned Louisiana, if I'm thinking about the same case when you mentioned the
Shintech case?
I think I was thinking about a situation in Louisiana where there was an environmental racist historical precedent set that prevented slave descendants from accessing some graves because there had been constant building going on. We're not talking about the same case?
No.
You mentioned Louisiana. I'm sure there's a million
there
environmental issues in Louisiana,
but this
for many reasons.
Yeah, this was the Shintech case.
Okay.
Shintech industry case.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious if we'd heard of that. And what I was thinking about was, I think, inclusive Louisiana versus St. James Parish. And this is, I think, as of March.
And this is actually St. James Parish too, but it's not that one, I don't think. But what year is that one, Simone?
So the plaintiffs challenged that the parish was using was allowing for like the continuous creation of heavy industry in predominantly black districts, and there had been no new construction of any of these industries in white areas in the last 46 years, and that the parish kept ignoring the residents' pleas to stop building heavy industry in these really particular districts, because they were actually stopping people from accessing graves.
What year was that?
This, I think, was just filed this year, but I saw a documentary about it a couple of years ago on Vice, and apparently, it had been chronicled for years that when graves were discovered, that there had been plenty that were built over, basically.
Yeah, this is not the same case, but that is very interesting.
It's a little creepy too.
Yeah.
I mean, just
I was
honestly,
thinking
just the
poltergeist
thought of
when
like,
you was.
yeah,
That's the whole time we were talking about. I was like, this sounds like poltergeist. Like
yeah. But
they
okay,
were building
yeah,
over graves.
I'm not surprised Louisiana for sure, and South Georgia. I've heard a lot of these issues happening too. But I appreciate what you said about how you've organized this education around all these different actors, because I think the default thought is that it's the companies. That it's the private corporations and it's the greed and it's the capitalism, but it's like the government absolutely like approves and is there every step of the way and has a role to play, and if can be asleep at the wheel a lot of the times when these things are happening. Because I think it was just a few years ago the EPA really started looking at jails and prisons in particular. Like they added that to like what they needed to map as far as environmental harm is concerned.
So I guess in my head, there's two things that are sitting in my head. It's like, one, what are the requirements to get a permit for big industries to build in these spaces? It's just like, okay, well, like you said, write the report, and it's like, okay, well, you wrote the report, you check the box. So here, you check the box. Versus no, a full report that, I don't know, test the soil or whatever the case may be. I'm thinking like Aaron Brockovich. Like, I don't want those situations to be situations. Those that have seen Aaron Brockovich, something happened with the city, and years later they were undergoing these major conditions that came from a result of the dumping and all the things of that magnitude. It took one person to really get into the fight to bring attention. Yeah. I don't want it to continue to be that.
Supposed to have the
exactly,
permit,
like a lot of that
and
stuff
they
that
still
she
get the
found.
permit. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just like, that's one. And then secondly, like, it would be nice to have something that's kind of a measuring stick to say, no, before you gentrify, did you do this, and this? And even, can you do that now versus putting these individuals out to do it? Like that's kind of where my head is when I say teeth and things of that magnitude. But yeah, this conversation actually changed my thought process from the last conversation. It's like, yeah, these are actual areas we really should be more stringent on. Versus it being more conceptualized in my head, like this is a concept that sounds great.
It's economic prosperity.
Yeah, it's like the
promise.
The back end of the American dream. It's like this is, now it's more like, no, these are areas we can actually get into.
Yeah. This
to
is
be
real
like,
life.
Yeah, exactly. Now this is real life. So thank you for this actual part, because I didn't expect to have this takeaway. So if people want to get in the fight for environmental justice, what could they do?
A few things. If you are looking in your neighborhood or even someone else's neighborhood that you want to assist in this movement, and you feel there's something, I would just say, unfair that your neighborhood is going through, it shouldn't be there. You're experiencing, I'll say, sickness in your neighborhood. You think it may come from the air. You think it may come from lead. You think it may come from an industry.
The water.
The water. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a part of the CDC, is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, right? It's like the environmental health piece of the CDC. And you can get in contact if you go to cdc.gov, with ATSDR, and it requires what you call they have something what you call a petition, and you're petitioning, with your neighborhood. You have forms that you have to fill out, and you're asking that they come there and they test these different things of what's happening, in your neighborhood, these environmental, detrimental things that we're talking about today, these pollution and hazards. And you can have the federal government, which we know CDC, ATSDR, for those who don't know, is a federal government agency. And you have this federal government agency come out and you can test these environmental pieces. And that calls for a petition from the neighborhood. And then they will take it from there to see if these environmental hazards are impacting your neighborhood. You can call your senator. You can call the congressman as well, and congressman office, and let them know what's happening specifically in my neighborhood. Is there anything that is going to be done about it could be anything in your neighborhood, anything that's going to be done about that. You can also connect yourself to community-based organizations, which advocate a lot for these different issues. They are strong, they are extremely powerful, they have a voice, they are in the movement. And if you don't know what to do, call your community-based organization. You're the one that you can be connected to as to how do we move forward? How do we, advocate for this? Because some people don't understand how to advocate, or they just feel like they don't have a lot of the time or the savvy. You don't know who to call, and what to do as well. You can call your health department, environmental health department, in your county. and let them know what's going on as well, you know, in your neighborhood. So that's another part of the government, because you have the county government, you have the state government, of course, and the federal government. So those are some of the things that you can do when you're looking at very specific issues that are going on in your neighborhood, and trying to understand how can you advocate for yourself, you know, in the community. That's a start.
Final thoughts.
My final thought is that thank you all for having me today. Thank you so much. I would like to me, the goal for environmental justice. I'm glad we talked about some of these issues outside of the, you know, our, you know, race, education, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at these social determinants of health, but, you know, having people understand that environmental justice and injustice is a part of your everyday life. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about the movement, we talked about, you know, the prison system, and these different policies, they're all connected to the environmental justice. So my goal is for, you know, the population to understand the environment is that what it is. It is a part of us in our everyday life. And so the more we are aware and educated on these issues, the more we can move forward in trying to progress the environmental justice movement.
Final thoughts?
Just that this has been incredibly helpful for me. I do also, again, appreciate this bigger picture about who and how all these different pieces are involved. I'm looking forward to also learning more about seeing some of these maps come out that I've read about a little bit, when it's mapping your area and its quality of life, its walkability, all those other social determinants. Like, I think those are really, really great maps.
Yes.
And I've seen those in certain areas, and I don't think it's something a lot of people are aware of even when they exist in their areas. So right. I do love seeing stuff like that. And this has been super informative for me. We were just talking about water. I'm super happy you're here. I wish I would have done more research on water because I have so many gripes about our water. And
yes, we know.
Not, and
I sure don't.
So much.
I sure don't.
That we could have been looking into.
Look, I told you I'm from the country in South Carolina where, you know, you liable to see a seahorse when you turn your water on and get a glass of water. So living in the city, and I can actually turn on the faucet and actually drink the water. I'm sorry, I'm not hard to impress.
With this injustice.
I'm not hard to impress with that one. A seahorse, Simone, a seahorse.
I believe you.
Could come out of my water back at home. So I'm not hard to impress when it comes to water out of pipes and stuff of that magnitude. Again, special thanks to Dr. Whitehead for joining us. Like I said, I think for me, this is less rainbows and unicorns and more horses and ponies. Like, it's tangible to me now. It's like, no, I get it. So special thanks. Thank you for coming back and making all that clarity.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. And again, we'll definitely have you back for the year is out, because, you know, these major issues we definitely want to stay abreast of and make the progress and things of that magnitude. All right, guys. So we will see y'all same time, same place on the Leadership Blend Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.